Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Bricks with Bask. This is a new series we're trying out where I will be building Lego sets inspired by each of our episodes from the podcast. So I'll be selecting a random episode from our list and then designing a Lego set here on Studio that represents that topic or captures some favorite thing from it. These sets will be available on our Rebrickable page. You can find the links down in the description. If you are so inspired to build any of these sets or build your own set for the episode, feel free to share those pictures in our Discord, where we will have a channel. But without further ado, let's get started. The podcast topic that I randomly drew was the geologic timescale, episode 12, one of our really early ones. And so for inspiration, I went to the blog page, our blog posts for the episode, to try to see, what might be fun to build. And the first thing that jumped out is on the blog post, we have pictures of outcroppings of, the mesas where you can see the sedimentary layers in the rock that show the stratigraphic and geologic time periods represented in those layers of sediment. That's a pretty iconic example of how we study and how we represent the geologic timescale. So I thought that would be a fun thing to try to build in Lego and represent those layers. As you will already have gleaned from looking at the cover image, the thumbnail for this video, I did not end up going with that in the end, but I did build it initially, so I thought it's still worth talking about, and you can see the build I made. This one's not included in the instructions, but if you are curious on how to make this, I can make those available, so just let me know. It's a pretty simple build, so it's not as complicated as probably others will be. The pink brick that I put, a plate that I put there in the middle, that's a reference to how a lot of Lego sets are built for anyone who might be familiar with that trend, where in a lot of Lego sets that the company designs, they'll include a pink brick or a red brick somewhere inside the set that's not going to be visible from the outside, and it's just kind of a little challenge that they give to themselves to see if they can work it in and hide it. I like to do that with a lot of the sets that I build. I always kind of think of it as the heart of the set, which is just a fun little addition. Here I'm trying to build up the layers of the sediment and the shape of that wind-blown mesa and outcropping. Get that feeling of those pillars that you see out in the Midwest here in the US. And so I'm doing it symmetrically. I could do it asymmetrically to make it feel a little bit more organic, but I wasn't feeling super inspired yet by the build, so I was just trying to kind of get an idea going. I hadn't come up with one that I was actually excited about yet, which comes a little bit later, spoilers. So I'm just making it symmetric, thinking that it could be a cool little desk thing. Finding the right angles is the biggest challenge here. So I'm just going through and trying to find pieces that have the right angle to slowly, gradually build up that very steep slope while also getting to the colors that I'm looking for. That's always one of the biggest challenges making Lego sets, is trying to get the right piece in the right color and find that balance between the two, because you don't always get those two things at the same time. Luckily, I'm using tan, and I think the color for the other one is nougat for the darker color, but I'd have to double check. Dark tan, it looks like, actually. There is a nougat that I almost used that's a similar color. Luckily, those are pretty common, so it's pretty easy. I don't have a ton to say about this part of the build just yet. We get into the more interesting part in just a little bit. I will mention that down there in the corner of the screen is little Lego Bask. Bask is our alligator mascot of the Bask and Coil, what we call our listeners. So Bask is going to be the one hanging out with us while we build these Lego sets. Part of the reason I went with this idea for this build was because those sedimentary layers is one of the biggest teaching tools we use when talking about the geologic record and explaining and visualizing it for people, to give them that idea of how we can conceive and visualize the passage of deep time. When you say a million years, that's hard to conceptualize, but being able to look at the rock layers and be like, yeah, this rock was formed a million years ago. This rock was formed 5 million years ago is a really useful tool. So that's why we used it as one of the main images for this episode on the blog post, but also why I thought that it might be a fun build. And now we're almost at the top of it. So I'm just putting the final touches, trying to figure out how tall I want to make it and how narrow I'm going to get with this last little bit. You can see I've got some pieces off to the side already selected. That'll be the flat top of the plateau. And yeah, I'm not unhappy with how this ended up. I think it looks pretty neat. And, I think it gets across what I was trying to make. But it's not very exciting. It's not super fun to build. And it doesn't scream geologic record to me. So I started thinking of how else could I do the geologic record. And the idea that came up in my mind was to go through the ages somehow. The different periods and epochs and eras of Earth's history. So I went back to the blog post and there's a date scale there, a timeline. And so I counted up all the major groups, not all equal periods. I did the eons for Archean and Proterozoic, and then the periods for Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and then did the epochs of Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, and Pleistocene, and Holocene. So I thought I'll do a display. And I have these bars that I've selected out to make kind of a spiral staircase of the geologic time scale was the idea. And these seem to be the best one. Right now I'm trying to look if there's any way to anchor these. And I finally decide, you know what? They'll probably hold together just well enough stacking them. So now I go and start stacking these up, and I'm going to spiral them out a bit at a time. Now, I'm sure there's a more efficient way I could have done this if I had figured out the right angle and done a handful and then did it from there. But I do them one by one because I wasn't sure how much I was going to like how this looked, and I hadn't thought of making it more efficient while I was doing it. But this is the idea, is to make this kind of spiral display of the history of Earth through some of the famous categories, famous periods, epochs and eons and all that sort of stuff. Go through those famous ones and make a little build to represent each one. Now at this point, I don't know what I'm going to put on each one, but that's the idea. So I'm just going to kind of start at the beginning and work my way through and getting the last few angled here. And I think I had them at 20 degrees each, which ends up working out almost perfectly. And in the long run works even better than I realized it was, because I accidentally have actually put too many here, which you'll see me realize later in the video. Because right now I've split the Carboniferous into the Pennsylvanian and the Mississippian, which are two subcategories that are used for it, mainly here in North America. And I read those off the list and just was like, cool, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 20. And just counted up to how many there were and didn't double check until I was going through and went, well, I'm missing one, and realized I'm missing the Carboniferous because I split the Carboniferous. But it almost lines up perfectly now, and eventually it does, which is just a very nice side effect. So to start things off, I'll begin with the beginning of Earth. This is not really one of the periods, but just going to be the first starting step here. And to represent that, we're going to have a cooling Earth. So I guess this could also be the sun, the beginning of our solar system, but in my mind it was the cooling crust of early Earth. Then we're in the Archean. It includes our first evidences of life. The evidence for life goes back, almost 3.5 billion years. So I'm trying to think of how to represent early life, and the earliest life fossils we have are stromatolites, which are these kind of mounds that are built up by bacterial colonies. And they make this kind of, mound on a little pedestal sort of shape. And so that's my little stromatolite there. Then we get into the Proterozoic. This is, both of these eons are the pre-Cambrian. And right before the Cambrian, we get the Ediacaran, which is the first time we get body fossils of, we're not sure, maybe animals. Some of them seem like they might have been animals. But it's really the first time that life seems to have gotten complex and big. and we're still not sure exactly how these categorize. They're very odd. There's like Dickinsonia and things like that are kind of shaped like sea slugs almost, or like sea ferns. These, or coral almost. These frond-like shapes that stand up. So right now I'm trying to figure that out, and that's what those plant materials in the claw I'm looking at there is. Maybe I can make some of those fronds. What I decide is maybe I'll go with Dickinsonia as that little Roomba kind of Ediacaran organism. So croissant was the best thing I could think of for that. It's the best I've got right now, so I decided to leave it there and move on to the Cambrian, which is the first time we get shelly fossils. This is when our fossil record really explodes and becomes robust, because now there's mineralized skeletons, shellfish and crustacean type of organisms that leave good fossils. So a clam. This is when we have fossil record of clams going back to the Cambrian. We'll go clam here. That one's pretty easy. Ordovician, life is still in the ocean, and we're seeing more complex forms of life. Many members that were doing well in the Cambrian are still doing well here, but famously cephalopods start doing very well. So cousins of squid and octopus and the nautilus, and most of them in the past, during this time, were shelled. We call a lot of these orthocones, these ice cream cone shaped shells, straight instead of curled like an ammonite or a nautilus. And so I'm making an orthoconoid cephalopod. Here's an example of one of those orthocone cephalopods. And I'm pretty happy with this little guy. I give him the little squinty eyes to represent those cephalopod wiggly eyes. Plant part for the tentacles. Drill for the shell. Might be my favorite one I built for this whole display. I definitely want one of these little guys just for myself. Now we're getting into the Silurian, which is the first time we're seeing like jawed fish and stuff. Fish start getting big. So I start getting a fish ready, but then I realize that that's not the correct spot for it, because coming up is the Devonian, which is called the Age of Fish. And so the fish piece should go there. So I consider it here for a moment and then realize, well, actually, let's move it one up and figure out something else for the Silurian. One of the things that's very famous about the Silurian fish is there were a lot of armored fish. So I'm looking for other fish options, but many of them were armored and jawless. We see jawed fish come around this time, but there were a lot of armored fish that had these shielded fronts and scaly backs. So I decide to take the croissant and use it for that shield-headed fish. This picture is Tugiaspis. At least I think I'm saying that right. And that's what I was using as an inspiration. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with my little armored fish. It's pretty simple, pretty good. Now I have to go back and figure out something else for the Ediacaran, because I stole Dickinsonia. So I decided to go with those fronds. And I'm sure there might be other ways to do this, to represent these. So if you have a good idea of how I could have done that one better, let me know. We move from the Devonian to the Carboniferous, which is named for carbon because of the immense coal beds that define these rock layers and these fossil sites. Because this is when trees and the first forests really became prominent on Earth, and there was finally enough wood to create carbon deposits and coal deposits. So I'm going to make a couple of trees, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to make my little trees. Pretty simple, but Carboniferous has to be trees. The Permian is next, and this is where we get some of our, big famous land vertebrate groups. The Carboniferous definitely had land animals roaming around and doing well, but this is where we start to get some of our first really big members and wide-ranging dominant groups. Your synapsids, which are the lineage that leads to eventually mammals, are doing extremely well during the Permian. And this includes things famously like Dimetrodon or Edaphosaurus, which both are these, they kind of look like lizards. I got pictures here so that you can get a reference, but with sails on their back. One's predatory, one's herbivorous. And we're not positive exactly what these sails were for. They could have been display. They could be, it was commonly thought that they might be for temperature regulation to kind of catch the sun and heat themselves up. So I made a little ambiguous one here. This could be a Dilophosaurus or Dimetrodon. But my little sail-backed synapsid, which I'm pretty happy with, is cute. It's also got a push me pull you thing, and that there's not sure which the front is. Now I'm trying to figure out something for the Triassic, which is the first age of dinosaurs. The little baby T-Rex is going to go on the Cretaceous, because that's when T-Rex shows up, and there's a baby T-Rex Lego piece, so that one was easy. The Triassic is the first age of dinosaurs, but it's also when we see the rise of a lot of other reptile groups. This is the first time the earliest crocodilomorphs show up. I can't figure out what I want to do for Triassic, so I'm going to do the Jurassic first, which the Jurassic is going to be Stegosaur. Some sort of stegosaur, because that's one of the most famous Jurassic groups. And so this is my little spiked-tailed dinosaur, little stegosaur, which I'm pretty happy with. Again, it could also be an ankylosaur, but stegosaurs are the famous member of that armored dinosaur group from the Jurassic. For the Triassic, I finally decided that I'm going to make my favorite Triassic dinosaur, which is Coelophysis. Coelophysis was one of the early groups of successful groups of dinosaurs, often considered one of the first big successful members of the lineage, amongst things like Plateosaurus and the like. So it was not the only successful dinosaur during this time, but a little Coelophysis just felt like the right fit here. So this is a very minimalistic Coelophysis, because I'm trying to make them tiny, and Coelophysis is a very spindly dinosaur, so it's hard to make it the scale. So I'm trying a few things out. And I liked the horn. It gives the little face. It definitely looks like a bird, but since dinosaurs eventually lead to birds, I felt like that was fitting. And so there's our Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. The Mesozoic is done. Dinosaurs are represented. Now we move on to the age of mammals. So a little rat. This is not going to be a rat. It's going to be a multituberculate. Multituberculates were a group of very rodent-esque mammals that were very successful after the age of dinosaurs and had very complex teeth, likely for cracking nuts and things like that. And so this little rat's going to represent that group as our Paleocene, right after the age of the dinosaurs, the first age of mammals. And then going forward, most of these are going to be mammals, because now we're in the age of mammals. The Eocene, we start to see a lot of big, charismatic fossil mammal groups. And for a lot of these, I went to Wikipedia, looked up the period or the age, and said, all right, what's some of the animals that show up here? And one of the ones that showed up here was a Brontothere. Brontotheres were these rhino-like mammals. Very similar, but not actually in the same group. Not actually rhinos themselves, but they had nose horn ornaments. They were big and bulky. They were herbivorous, so very, very similar. So I'm making a little Brontothere here. I've got the pronged nose horn that is so charismatic. This is Megacerops is the reference picture we're using, so that's technically what we have here, but got a little Brontothere. And this one, if I didn't already have the Cephalopod as my favorite, this little Brontothere might be my favorite out of the group. I'm very happy with how cute he is. Got him up on the stand now. So that's the Eocene done. The Oligocene, we actually end up coming back to because I accidentally just forget it and skip it. Right now I'm trying to see if there's any other way to connect the head so that it doesn't hang lower than the body. So at this point I'm actually building for the Miocene. Like I said, I accidentally skipped the Oligocene, just miscounted. The Miocene is famous for horses. Horses became extremely diverse, and a lot of their species evolved during the Miocene. So the Miocene is often known for its horses. So I'm trying to figure out a horse. That's why I had the horse skull out. I'm trying to see how to make a horse. I think maybe a horse head could work, and all in all, not too bad. That could have passed, but I'm ultimately not super satisfied with it. It's just a little too simplistic, a little too minimalist. So I decided to try to make a little horse, which I run into the issue of not all the colors work well. I just can't quite get the colors to work the way I want them to. But this is my attempt at a little horse. So if you come up with a better way to build this build, let me know and share your own version, because I am 100% willing to be proved wrong about this horse. So, trying to figure out the neck. Maybe it'll be an all black horse, but that feels not quite like it'll scream horse. So it's going to have a black body, brown legs, and trying to figure out the neck right now. We're getting to the issue of I've made the body very tiny, and it's hard to make the head and neck fit size-wise. So I'm going through and looking for stuff. Now, in fairness, horses were much more diverse during this time than they are today. So there were big horses, there were small horses, horses of very different proportions. So this could just be one of those, extinct, differently shaped horses. I think that is a good enough defense for why my horse has such a big head. Figuring out the stand, and got a little horse. So not too bad. I don't love it. I don't hate it. If you come up with a better idea, please share, and we'll improve the set. Now we move on to the Pliocene, which I knew immediately what I was going to do, because the Pliocene is this age that the Gray fossil site dates to. And the Gray fossil site is famous for a ton of new species. That's the site that both me and David have worked at before. And one of its most famous new species is the red panda that we discovered there, Pristinailurus bristoli. And so I'm going to do the red panda. Now, Studio doesn't have the red panda Lego mini that just got released not too long ago. So we're going to use a red otter for now, or an orange otter for now. But if I build this for myself, I will be using my little red panda mini. So you just have to get that little red panda mini to make this accurate. I will make sure that's shown in the instructions. You'll definitely be able to order the right one if you order off Rebrickable. And now we're into the Pleistocene, which is the first point that we see the earliest humans. So, a little human, as we come out of Africa and start to spread around the world. And now is the point where I realize I've miscounted. I realize that I have an extra one for the Pennsylvanian and Mississippian, and I realized that I skipped the Oligocene, so we gotta shift them over. And now I gotta make something for the Oligocene. So I went back to Wikipedia, looked up some pictures, and realized that now I get to make one of the coolest fossil groups from the Cenozoic. I'm gonna make a terror bird. And if I'm gonna make a terror bird, the easiest place to start is with my Coelophysis, because birds are dinosaurs. And my build for the Coelophysis is already very bird-like, so we'll just flip those legs around, get rid of that long tail. Now, the thing that doesn't fit with this is that terror birds are famous for having very big heads. They had large beaks and were predatory birds that ran down their food flightless. So very much like an ostrich, but they didn't have a tiny head like an ostrich. So I need to get rid of that tiny head and figure out a big terror bird head. This one took some doing. There's lots of options for how I could do it, so I'm trying a few different things here. This one ends up being a bit caricature-y, a bit mascot heady in how large it is. But I'm not unhappy with it. I do kind of like it. I think it fits. Once again, if you can come up with a version that is a little more subtle or a little more scaled correctly, by all means, please feel free to. But that's my terror bird, and then now we are left with the Holocene, which is modern day. I was going to do a plastic bottle to be pessimistic, because plastic will be one of the lasting things we leave in the geologic record, because it doesn't break down, and it's already been incorporated into rock. Or it doesn't break down very fast, and in certain situations, almost at all. But I decided to be optimistic and represent this is the age of human knowledge. The Holocene is our modern, most recent age. It is where all of human recorded history has happened. It is where we have invented science and art and all sorts of other things about our society. And so I'm making a book to represent this is the age of knowledge. Be a bit more optimistic about it instead of pessimistic and judgy. And so that's about it. This is the finalized tree. I'm pretty happy with all the ranks and pretty pleased with how it turned out. And so I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you have different ideas for what could have been on any of these rungs, please feel free to share. If you make your own builds of this or your own Lego builds to represent the geologic time scale, your own inspired builds for this episode, please send pics our way. We'd love to see them. You can share them on Discord or social media and tag us. If you're up for them being shared on our site as fan art, let us know and how you'd like to be tagged, and we might add it to our fan art page. And let us know how you're liking this new series. Bricks with Mask is a brand new thing we're trying out, so We'd love to hear your feedback, love to hear how you're enjoying it or what you think. And tune in next time. We'll be releasing these once a month at the end of every month. And if you enjoyed it, stay tuned and keep an eye out for the next one and see what we're building then. Check out the description for all of our links to our Rebrickable page and website, and feel free to check out the other videos or the original podcast episode if you haven't listened to Geologic Timelines yet. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.